I hope this is worth it.
Yeah, me too. Anyway, everybody, Joseph P. Farrell is here.
When did we start?
Just now.
Okay.
Go to GizaDeathStar.com. Use that PayPal button. Okay, we're going to get started.
Well, thanks. Oh, my. Another one of those nights.
Yeah, I know. They must have put something funny in your pizza.
No. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. Is it possible? This lady is asking this question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that the sons of God who were mentioned in Genesis were people much like us, but from a different age? And could it be that they are long-lived because they first ate of the tree of life before they went bad? Adam and Eve were driven from the garden to prevent them from eating from this tree of life and physically living forever. But if they had eaten from the good tree first and then the bad tree, they would have lived forever in a fallen but physical state.
Mm-hmm.
At least that is what the scriptures seem to indicate. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I don't subscribe any particular special status to the Old Testament beyond any other ancient set of writings, and you have to be very careful.
Yes.
When you approach it from this point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But I've said many, many times that, and on your show, in fact, that I think that in order for the Old Testament story about the sons of God coming down and, beholding the daughters of men, that they were fair and all of this stuff,
mm-hmm.
and having children by them, that there's two things going on there. In terms of modern science, there has to be some sort of genetic compatibility to
yes.
begin with between
right.
species for that to happen.
Right.
And there's an implicit thing that we've never talked about here in that statement. And that is that you don't, if you're a normal, human being,
mm-hmm.
you don't find creatures of another species attractive.
True.
We don't have sexual desire for gorillas.
Yeah.
At least most of us don't.
Yeah.
Okay. But I choose gorillas and higher apes because they're from the same genus.
Yes.
Or phylum, I should say. But the story in Genesis is implying something very significant, and that is if the daughters of men are sexually attractive to the sons of God, there has to be a very close species resemblance to begin with.
Yes.
And you get that kind of reinforced if you compare the Old Testament stories to some of the Mesopotamian literature. So if one is taking the hypothesis that she's assuming, and I think she's reasonable to do so,
mm-hmm.
I would have to agree with her that these people, whoever they are very much like us.
Yes.
At least in some respects. Now, that said, I forget what the other part of her question was, but I think it was about the tree of life and
yes.
the tree of knowledge. Those themselves are, I think, kind of interesting allegorical symbols because, and I said this way back in Giza Death Star, the very first book I wrote, that the prohibition of eating of the tree of life was because of the fall, and it was in order to prevent mankind from an infinite progress in evil. or for that matter, the good. You again, it's a technology. In other words, what I'm getting at is that it appears that this tree of life, whatever it is if one is going to read everything else technologically, then that has to be read that way too.
Yeah.
And that's a technology, and this is why I'm so concerned and have been writing with Dr. DeHart our book on transhumanism, and then doing so many blogs about this issue, because the technology, whether we like it or not, is coming down the pike.
Oh, yeah.
And there's already talk that's out there in this subject of extending people's lifespans as a punishment.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And when you add to that our entire financial system that's been in place in modern times, basically since the Renaissance, is predicated on a human lifespan of approximately 70 years.
Yes.
Imagine the changes to the financial system and the amount of debt that you can create if you extend the average human lifespan.
Oh, my gosh.
You see, so in other words, it's an immense mechanism for the expansion of credit even further.
Well, Joseph, I think the elites, the Western elites, are terrified. They just act that way in what's going on. And today, a news story came out that the Pentagon, well, Russia's not paying any attention to us, blah, blah, blah.
Too bad.
Yeah, too bad. I mean, they have got to have a war because of the economy.
No. Okay, let's be very clear about something. All of this hysteria and panic that we've been hearing over the economy, the people that have been putting this out have been putting it out since the Reagan era.
Yes.
Okay? Now, my question is, why hasn't the predicted collapse, when we turn the clock that far back, not yet shown up? And the reason it has not shown up is that the U.S. dollar reserve currency status, while wobbly, is nowhere near collapse. And the reason why people have to wake up and understand that the financial analysts, when they're looking and showing you their graphs and charts, they're only looking at the finance. And this is the reason they are themselves so puzzled about their inability to make accurate predictions. You have to expand the context that you're looking at. And part of that context in today's modern world, let's go back to what reserve currency status really means.
Okay.
Reserve currency status has always accrued to the nation which is the dominant maritime power of its age.
Uh-huh.
And that means, if you go back to the High Middle Ages, that means Venice. If you go into the early modern period, it means Portugal, then Spain, France, the Dutch, Great Britain, and now the United States.
Yeah.
If you look at that very carefully, you'll see the sequence of naval power. And the reason why naval power is crucial is because that protects your international commerce and trade. Now, the other thing is in the modern world, the flow of currency in international trade is predominantly electronic.
Yes.
And this means that rather than maritime power being the measure of the ability to protect and maintain reserve currency status, it's space. Okay? And the United States is nowhere near losing its dominance in global communications and electronic transfer and so on and so forth. This is why you see Russia, China, Brazil, India, South Africa talking about their own system of international clearing.
Yes.
Okay? Because you cannot challenge the reserve currency status of the dollar until you have an equal footing or near parity in your ability to transmit international financial information securely. Okay?
Okay.
Now, this is the reason, partly, that the Chinese president recently came out and said very boldly and just very nakedly that China needs to militarize space.
Yeah.
Okay. This is about finance, folks, and international clearing.
Oh.
Now, the other thing that people have to remember, and this was pointed out to me, and I want to mention this here. This was pointed out to me by Secretary Fitz, Catherine Austin Fitz. When Germany was reunified, one of the things, and I recall this very, very well myself, one of the things that the then West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl did in order to basically present the world with a fait accompli was that he tendered the West German D-Mark, the Deutschmark, against the East German currency and simply bought out the East German currency at very favorable and non-market determined exchange rates. So in other words, what happened was the reunification was driven as much by the fact that West Germany simply imposed its currency on the Eastern zone by way of a tender, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And once that happened, once you've got currency integration, everything else just kind of falls into place naturally. Now, let's look at what's happening internationally right now.
Yeah.
You have companies like Google, the big telecommunications companies and so on, the banks and so on, offering all over the third world accounts and iPhones and everything else with rebates denominated in dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, what they're doing is very cleverly, they are extending the use of technology and integrating it with rebates denominated in dollars. They're extending the dollar system. It's not collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's put out of our mind the war business. Now, let's talk about the war. Okay, since everybody's going into hysterics, we're going to have a global thermonuclear war, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, we're not.
Well, I don't think that Russia would start it.
No, Russia wouldn't start it, and I don't think we will either.
No.
Crazy as our leaders are, I don't think we will, because the problem is, in a global thermonuclear war, nobody wins.
That's right.
There's nothing for the bankers. There's nothing left for them to repossess or foreclose on.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Now, when I was a kid, and I'm laughing, but when I was a kid, 6 or 7 years old, my folks would sit around and, the big news of the day was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember growing up and everybody was afraid that the A-bombs are going to start falling on our head any minute,
Yeah.
And I remember my folks debating with their friends, and I just turned around and I said, it's not going to happen.
Well, I would give...
Hang on. Let me explain why. I'm not done. The reason why I told my folks and their friends that Russia's not going to start this is if they want to conquer the world, they're not going to reduce it to rubble. There's nothing left to conquer. And by the same token, the United States has nothing to gain from reducing Russia to radioactive rubble because there's nothing left for the Western financial oligarchy to exploit.
Yeah.
So put this out of your head for the moment. Okay? Now, let's go to the next step. I'm still not done.
Okay.
Let's go to the next step. Let's assume that there is a party crazy enough in D.C. to want a war with Russia.
Oh, there is.
And I have no doubt that there is, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Let's assume this. I have a blog coming up, I think tomorrow or the next day. They have just been handed something that I think made them stop in their tracks.
Oh.
And this was an incident in the Black Sea involving a U.S. Aegis-class missile frigate called the Donald Cook, right?
Yes.
Do you know about this incident?
Somewhat.
Well, let me describe what happened.
Okay.
A Russian Sukhoi 24. That's kind of an old Russian fighter bomber. It's not the most modern equipment, but, it's still capable.
Yeah.
A Russian Sukhoi 24 bomber, unarmed, flew toward the Donald Cook.
Oh, boy.
Okay? And it was seen on the frigate's radar. Now, please understand, this is the United States Navy's most sophisticated missile defense frigate radar ship.
Yes.
Okay? As the Sukhoi Russian bomber was approaching the aircraft, it was seen on radar. And then the radar screens on the Aegis frigate went completely blank.
That's wonderful.
We're talking here, $1 billion system went totally blank.
Oh, cool.
Now, hang on. This is not the end of the story. Because what happened after this is the Russian bomber flew fake missile passes over this frigate no less than 12 times.
Oh, my gosh.
While the crew of the frigate is trying to reboot the system. And guess what? The system wouldn't even reboot. It wouldn't even load.
Well,
hang on.
Okay.
Not done. I hope you understand the significance of this.
Oh, yes, I do.
This isn't just typical radar jamming.
Mm-hmm.
This is on the scale of those 1950s and 60s and 70s UFO reports where UFOs are hovering over nuclear missile sites and not only turning them off or on,
mm-hmm.
but reprogramming the target information in the computers.
Yes.
Okay, this is what happened.
Oh,
Let me repeat this. This is what happened. Now, let's look at very carefully what this means. Very clearly, Russia is sending a message.
Yeah.
And the message is, oh, look what we can do.
Yeah.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
Okay? Because you have to understand, GeorgeAnn, the shockwaves that this had to have sent through the Pentagon.
Oh, yeah.
Because this means that our almighty aircraft carriers that are protected by these missile frigates with the same system are now sitting ducks to those big, huge Russian missiles that are aircraft carrier killers.
Yeah.
And that they can turn our systems off at will.
Well, may they turn all the systems
Well,
off.
hang on. I'm still not done. I'm still not done here.
Okay.
You have to understand that for the Russians to reveal this capability, this was not simply a one-off affair. This wasn't a local base commander saying, oh yeah, go out there, jam the American radar and fly over the ship.
Right.
This had to have come from very high
within
the Russian command structure to reveal a capability like that.
Oh, yeah.
And if they're willing to reveal a capability like that, chances are, knowing the Russians, that they've got other capabilities up their sleeve that revealing this one has got to put American and Western planners in the position of thinking, well, gee, if they're willing to reveal this, what aren't they revealing that they might have?
Yeah.
Now, let's continue. I'm not done.
Oh, boy.
When Adolf Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, this is a little history lesson to kind of put what I've just said into a little bit of into context.
Yes.
And I repeat this in the blog coming up. But when the Germans invaded, June 22nd, 3:15 in the morning in 1941, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Just as the sun came up, you have a 900-mile front erupting with an artillery bombardment, and off the Germans go. When they meet the first Russian armored formations, they encounter the T-34 tank, they encounter the KV-1 heavy tank, and they encounter the KV-2 heavy tank. Now, this is 3 weapons systems that neither the Germans, the French, the Italians, the British, Americans, or Japanese even knew about.
Yeah.
And the Russians had them deployed in their thousands.
Oh, boy.
Now, these were fairly modern tanks. They had some flaws and some drawbacks, but they were well armored, well armed, and so on and so forth. And they became the backbone of Soviet armored forces throughout the entire war, these tanks, that no one knew existed.
Oh, boy.
The Russians didn't parade them in their May Day parades.
Right.
You see what's going on here? They held them hidden.
Yes.
Okay? This is typical of the Russians. They will present you their most obsolescent equipment.
Yes.
And say, oh, how weak are we?
Yes. Come beat us up.
Come beat us up, please.
I love it.
So, yeah, you can see why this might be giving them some concern in the Pentagon after they turn off our most sophisticated missile tracking defense system.
Wow.
Because without that, our ships are sitting ducks.
Mm-hmm.
This was a real warning signal. You know, if you want to bring it on, go right ahead. We don't want to bring it on, and that's why we're telling you we have this capability.
Oh boy!
But in case you do, you know, bring it on.
Well,
now here's the other thing.
Oh boy!
There's more.
Oh my gosh!
Because if they, of course there is. If they can do this,
what can't they do?
No, hang on. If they can do this with our electronic communications and missile defense systems on a ship, what might they be able to do with our international clearing facilities in international finance? You see, this was an enormous event.
Oh my gosh.
And because of this, you'll notice something in recent days. The American rhetoric has calmed down considerably.
Yeah.
This is why.
Wow.
What you're really seeing here is, I think, the first stages of Cold War Act 2.
Oh, boy.
We just got done about 20 years ago with Cold War Act 1, and Act 1 might be subtitled Russia on the Defensive.
Yeah.
Cold War Act 2 might just as equally be called the West on the Defensive.
Yeah.
Okay? Because what's just been revealed is, you know, the Russians didn't just suddenly decide to roll over and quit investigating advanced military technologies when the Soviet Union dissolved. I mean, get this through everybody's head.
Oh, Joseph, they've got all kinds of technologies that.
Well, of course they do.
And medicines too.
And I know that, and they don't talk about a lot of them.
Yeah.
And when they do talk about them, usually they get poo-pooed in the Western scientific press. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
You know, my point here, folks, about mentioning all this and mentioning the UFOs that were turning American and Soviet ICBMs off and on and reprogramming the targeting data and all this, is that in my book, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, I talk about the research of an American researcher by the name of Robert Hastings, a wonderful researcher. And he pointed out that after this had happened a couple of times at an one time would have been sufficient for me if I was a Pentagon general, but apparently it takes a couple of times. But after this had happened at a U.S. ICBM site in Montana, the Boeing company was brought in to investigate, what the heck had just happened. And the Boeing company was able, through examination of what had happened, to replicate what the UFO had done to a certain degree. Now, the same thing happened in Soviet sites. Now, do you not think that the Russians are going to want to understand what happened and to see if they could replicate the performance? Of course they would.
Wow.
And I think what you're looking at with this recent bomber episode with our ship is the product of all of that research. This means they've got a capability. We probably have similar capabilities, but it also means that our deployed technologies are going to have to be either upgraded to something that's currently secret, or that we're going to have to develop a countermeasure capability. So put World War III on hold for now.
This is very good news, Joseph. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is very good news. Yeah. I just shudder to think of the stupidity that this country would even consider going to war with Russia.
Well, yeah. I mean, it didn't work out too well for Napoleon.
Yeah.
When the Russian army showed up at the gates of Paris, that was kind of the message.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't work out too well for Hitler. About the only one it worked out pretty well for was the Kaiser, but it didn't work out in time. So you know, it's just nuts. You know, you don't go poking a stick into a caged bear that has hydrogen bombs.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't a very good idea.
No, very bad.
It's a very bad. You know, it's like I say, you know, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in 1941 and saw these Russian tanks that no one knew existed,
mm-hmm.
and for their period, their enormous size,
mm-hmm.
they were just stunned.
Yeah.
So you know, it's not a good idea to go playing around with Moscow unless you are absolutely certain that you know everything that they've got, and quite frankly, we don't.
Yeah. That's right.
You know, according to the Russian version of this incident with the American frigate, and I haven't been able to determine if this is true or not, but according to their version of the story, the frigate hightailed it to a port in Romania, probably Constanza, and the crew, a significant portion of the crew, threatened to resign over the whole thing. Which, again, you can't blame them. If all of a sudden our most sophisticated missile defense system on our naval ships is worthless,
yeah.
that pretty much is not a very good thing.
Oh, boy. I think that's the most wonderful thing that has happened in a long time.
Well, yeah, if it knocks some sense
yes.
into these arrogant planners, you know, I keep telling people the Western elite and military and intelligence planners are showing the same kinds of arrogance that was shown by the Third Reich at the height of its power.
Yeah.
You know, that, you know, we're the Supermen and we can do anything. You know, we took France out in a month, so that pretty much proves it. Well, no, it doesn't prove it.
The French are lovers; they're not fighters.
Oh, nonsense! No, this is another bit of American military propaganda about the French that I just, being part French myself, I find that very objectionable because, you know, if it hadn't been for the heroism of the French army at Dunkirk, the British would have suffered much more than they did. And again, you know, France took the brunt during World War I, and that's it's not a very fair characterization.
I know. I'm part French too.
I know.
So, and one of my uncles was taken into a camp in France, and when he finally escaped, he went to Canada, and he was never right in his mind after that.
Well, you know, the French...
And it was the Americans that captured him.
Yeah. The French weren't cowards in World War II. They were simply out-generaled. And, you know, the same thing for those that think the Italians weren't very good fighters. The same thing holds true of them. They were very good fighters when they were properly led, and there were a couple of very good Italian generals that don't get much mentioned in American history books. But the reality here is, I think people have to quit listening to all the hysteria mongers on the internet and start thinking. The financial analysts have to, you know, the people that follow nothing but the people that do nothing but financial analysis. Well, the financial analysts, are in the main, they're not looking at the wider political and technological picture. So, you know, you have to put yourself in an interdisciplinary frame of mind.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the situation isn't dire. It is, but I don't think that the situation is quite what many people think it to be. I just recently recorded last Thursday a talk with Catherine Austin Fitz
yes.
for her website. And without going into the details here, the thing that mystifies both of us, and of course she's much more of an expert on financial matters than I. You can write what I know about it on the back of a postage stamp.
Oh.
But the thing that keeps mystifying us is, where did all of this money go? If it was in the system, according to conventional analysis, it should show up and have shown up long before now as hyperinflation. And the fact that it hasn't means that we're not dealing with a conventional system.
Yeah.
So, you put the electricity into a circuit, and it's going to come out at the load end.
Yep.
Well, if you're putting that much so-called financial electricity into the circuit, and it's not showing up at this load end, then where's it showing up? That's the problem.
On Mars, maybe.
Well, that's not so far-fetched.
Wow. And it seems like every couple of weeks they come out with another planet that is capable of hosting human life.
Or it's in the life habitable zone.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. This, I have some blogs coming up about all of that too. That aspect of things, I think we're being prepared for something. And the reason why, and I don't want to get into details, when the new book comes out, it's at the printer, by the way, I forgot to mention that.
Oh, good.
It's called Thrice Great Hermetica and the Janus Age. And it's about the Middle Ages and Renaissance. And people may be thinking, well, what does that have to do with new planets? It has a great deal to do with new planets. Because I want to run a scenario by people.
Yes.
Without getting into the details that are in the book.
Yeah.
What if you knew about the existence of another world with people?
Human people?
With human people, and they had their temples and their gods and their gold. And what if you knew about it for, say, a couple of centuries?
Oh, boy.
Before you made the knowledge public.
Oh, my gosh.
And how would you make it public? Without upsetting everybody?
Just a little dribble at a time.
Well, either that or you get a prominent religious authority involved with the disclosure.
Like the Pope?
Like the Pope.
Oh, my.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, study history. It's very important because I think we're living in kind of the same thing going on now that happened back in the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Yep. And guess who's at the heart of it?
Who?
Venice.
Oh my goodness.
You betcha. You betcha.
Well, they wanted to break away from
Italy recently.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. This is the other thing that I think that's something to watch very carefully here.
And Italy told them no.
Well, Italy told them no, yeah. Understandably. But I think these secessionist movements are only going to grow.
Yes.
And what people have to be very careful of is two things. There's a certain class of people out there writing online newsletters and so on that are defending the idea, and it's plausible and it's reasonable. I'm not saying it's not.
Yeah.
That what you're witnessing in the early part of the 21st century is the breakdown of the big centralization government model. Okay?
Yeah.
And they're arguing that this is a natural process. It's only going to increase because governments have shown their inutility. Big corporations are increasingly showing their inutility and
their
people,
cruelty.
And their cruelty and so on and so forth. and people have had enough. Well, that's true. But on the other hand, you have to be extremely careful, because it is much easier if you want to put into place a global system of control.
Yes.
It is much easier to establish control if you have smaller and smaller governmental entities with which to deal.
Yeah.
That was the whole reason that you found European bankers hiding in the wings behind the American Civil War.
Yeah.
It's much easier to deal with two smaller versions of the United States than one big one.
Mm-hmm.
Much, much easier. So, Bismarck, believe it or not, Chancellor Bismarck had quite a few things to say about that particular issue. But
oh boy.
Yeah, oh boy.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's interesting. People need to read what Bismarck said about the assassination of President Lincoln. That's very interesting reading. But so that's something to watch very carefully, because if secession movements like this keep growing in the West, I've been warning all along, this business of poking the stick in the Russian bear's cage and telling it to behave vis-a-vis the Ukraine, which was something we stirred up in the first place.
Yes.
Two can play the covert operations game.
Yes, they can.
Yes, they can. So watch this very carefully. If these secessionist movements start spreading in the West, and you start hearing noises or commentary from, say, Russia or China on this, then things just heated up quite a bit. Yeah, wow.
Yikes. Oh, Joseph. Well,
if let's put it differently. If the Cold War essentially was a hot war.
Yeah.
But it was a hot war fought through proxies.
Yes.
And it was a hot war fought by means of covert operations. And, America has not abandoned that model.
Right. We use it in the Middle East.
We've used it everywhere
in
since
Africa.
9/11. Yeah.
Yeah, everywhere.
Everywhere since 9/11, particularly. That model, I'm just warning people. The model is dangerous because it's a game that two people can play.
Yeah, it sure is. Oh. Yeah.
And the Russians have played that game.
They're very good at it.
They're very good at it.
They play chess while little Winky Blinky up there plays checkers.
Well, for the most part, yeah. They are long-term thinkers, and we've got some long-term thinkers too. So the game is afoot.
Well, but our long-term thinkers are more driven by money. I mean, Joseph, it's pathetic.
But this is my point in raising the history here. Money is always part of this story, so long as you are dealing with central banking models where money issuance is in the hands of a private monopoly.
Yeah.
This is why the story of reserve currency status and how it has shifted as maritime power and geopolitical realities shift.
Mm-hmm.
This is why it's shifting to space.
Oh. Well, here back on this planet, they're making homelessness a federal crime. I mean, you can't feed the homeless, you can't give them shelter, you can't give them money without being thrown in jail.
Well,
it is so cruel and so backward.
It's backward, and it won't work, because what it is asking people to do is be inhuman.
Yes.
And ultimately, these types of systems, as we know from history, they never work.
Good.
Well, they never do. Show me an example that has. None. They don't work. So
you can't even sleep in your car.
Oh, I know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the problem is the problem that is happening is there's pushback. People are waking up and getting fed up, and the game has to be changed. And if the current game keeps going, they're only cutting their own throat, and this is the problem. So I think there's some reassessment going on. There has to be.
Gosh, I hope so.
Yeah, I think there is, definitely.
Golly. And then we've got this outbreak of Ebola that is alleged to be a new strain.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got 2,000 SARS samples that are disappeared from Paris. I mean...
Well, look, that's a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
The CBS reporter, Atkinson, I forget what her first name was, she attempted to expose some of this fraud going on in the medical establishment.
Yes.
Vis-a-vis swine flu, supposed cases of swine flu that weren't even really flu cases to begin with.
Right.
Just to sell people vaccines.
Yep.
This whole paradigm is breaking down, and it's just an indicator to me that there has to be some pretty high-level reassessment of things going on. And I go back to this incident in the Black Sea with the USS Donald Cook.
Mm-hmm.
If any portion of that incident is accurate, then it's got to be giving the planners some great deal of pause.
Well, let's hope so. Oh.
No, it would. I mean, military planners, like it or not, are not out simply to go around and create as many casualties as possible. Military planning involves in minimizing everybody's casualties and accomplishing your objective. And you can't do that when you have communication systems that are that vulnerable. You simply cannot in modern warfare.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, they didn't minimize casualties in Iraq. I mean...
No.
And they haven't... Well, why are we... Like Syria, we are sponsoring the Al-Qaeda types.
Yes.
And they're just going around willy-nilly killing everybody.
I think all of this is, there's a certain amount of what is called blowback in any planning like this.
Yeah.
In other words, unintended consequences. So I think some of that is blowback. But I think the wider agenda of supporting these radical, nutty groups has always been for the long-term objective of ratcheting up the cultural divide between the West and the Islamic world for the purposes of geopolitical manipulation. I mean, it's the oldest game on the planet. It is the oldest game on the planet.
Oh, God.
And, create dissatisfaction with, or alleged dissatisfaction with a regime, back the rebels, insert your power through puppet regimes, and, it's the oldest game on the planet. Nothing has changed.
No.
This is what people have to understand. When, I think...
That's why it's good to know history.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. This is why it's extremely important to know history.
Yeah.
Because the American public, in particular, I can't speak for Canada or Australia or the rest of the Western world, but I suspect similar things were promoted in those countries.
Yeah.
That after the collapse of the Soviet bloc, we're entering a new era of peace and prosperity. The West has won. We're at the end of history. Going back to that kind of crazy book that was published in the late 1980s. It was called The End of History. Communism and socialism have shown themselves for the junk heap that they are. they're going to collapse. Let's move on. Bright new age, unipolar American hegemony, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Well, it hasn't worked out that way.
Yeah.
And the reason why it hasn't worked out that way was to assume that the geopolitical dance of the great powers has changed in any fundamental, that Russia was simply going to roll over and play dead and quit military research and expenditures, or that any other powers were going to do that. That's nonsense.
Yes.
It's nonsense.
Yes, it is.
Wake up. The big wake-up call, I still think, that's coming down the pike is, as these blocks are realigning and reforming in a certain sense, I think what you're going to have to look at very carefully are countries that are on the fence between the East and West.
Yeah.
Countries like Germany, countries like Japan, Brazil, because these countries to a great degree share Western values and culture, at least in Germany and Brazil's case, but economically their ties and interests are with the East.
Yeah.
This is putting Germany in particular in a very, very unusual and typically German, diplomatic position.
Yeah.
Because their economic ties, ever since Frederick the Great, have been principally to the East. Their military has always had to be powerful because they're surrounded by powerful countries.
Yes.
This is just, it's not that the Germans are warlike, it's just the accident of geopolitics. It's where their country is.
Oh, boy.
So, I did a blog last week, or maybe the week before, GeorgeAnn, about the German Interior Minister, Thomas de Maizière. Now, the de Maizière family is a very, very old family. It's actually Alsatian, all right? But their loyalties have always been to Germany rather than France. And they've always been a very prominent family in German politics and in German military affairs, and so on and so forth. But they have always also been a kind of pro-Western family in terms of German political thinking. Well, Thomas de Maizière is one of these individuals that staunchly, in his own words, is staunchly Atlanticist. In other words, he believes that Germany's best geopolitical interests have always lied with the West and with alignment to the West. All right, and this is a debate that's been going on in German history as far back as Germany's been Germany.
Yeah.
And de Maizière came out in an interview with Der Spiegel in Germany, stating that while he's firmly pro-Atlanticist, he believes that the United States is operating completely without boundaries.
Oh,
now, for someone, for the German Interior Minister, coming from that family and its long association in German politics and in the German military, and with its firm commitments that it's maintained traditionally in this pro-Western orientation, for him to say this is huge.
Oh, yeah.
It's another one of these little warning bells that the geopolitical course we're embarked on is not too good. I suspect we're going to see the Japanese eventually backlash against Prime Minister Abe and his government because, he's rattling the sword and poking the sword in China's cage, which, again, didn't work out too well for Japan the last time around.
Right. That's right.
So, Brazil is another case. The Brazilians are fed up with American imperialism and
well, can you blame them?
No, of course not. No, I don't blame any of these countries that are fed up with what they see going on. I don't.
Yeah.
But, Brazil concluded a couple years ago an agreement with the Chinese Space Agency to share technology, launch satellites, and so on and so forth. So, those are the countries we're going to have to watch in the next few years, because depending on how we play our cards, we could drive those countries out even further away from the Western orbit, and I don't think that's a good idea, believe it or not. You know, the last time we drove Germany out of the Western orbit, we had a little thing called World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You know,
oh, God.
And the same thing with Japan, you know. We're going to cut off your oil so they sink our fleet. You know?
Yeah.
These types of measures haven't worked out too well in the past for anybody concerned.
That's right. Boy. Yeah, this country better be damn careful.
Yeah, we have to, you know, I think there's a certain amount of reasonability behind the idea that some people are floating that there is an attempt to deliberately return to the Cold War because the world was so much easier to manage.
Yeah.
when there were two huge blocks, you know, of geopolitical power interests. So that may be going on too. I don't know.
Wow. What do you have any more thoughts about that missing airplane?
Oh boy. They pardon me. I do, and my thoughts really haven't changed, GeorgeAnn, from our first interview. They cannot agree on a story.
Yeah.
And my basic point of view when we first talked about this has not changed, in that if this were any sort of terrorist incident, where's the terrorism?
Yeah.
You know, it hasn't shown up. If it was a covert operation, say of Iran or Israel or the United States or China or whoever, again, if it were one of these nations that were credibly involved in a covert operation, you can rest assured that evidence of it would have been found by other nations and exposed.
Yes.
Particularly in this geopolitical climate with the tensions so high between the West and the East. And this has not happened. There have been a few little, I think, kind of trial balloons from the Russian media, but they haven't played out. I mean, they haven't played well, so, you know, the Russians dropped it. So I'm still sticking with my intuition here, and it's nothing more than that. This is a genuine mystery that no one really knows what happened to the thing, and I'm willing to this day to entertain the idea that maybe the thing just went poof.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Crazy as that sounds. You know, the interesting thing there, GeorgeAnn, and I think this happened, I may have mentioned it when we talked before.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it did occur before we talked the last time about that. General McInerney got on faux news, which is my word for Fox News, and I believe he was talking with Sean Vanity or somebody on the Fox News network. And he went on and on about his sources, his intelligence sources. You know, it's always unnamed sources. So, you know, that sends a red flag up to me right away. If you can't footnote, don't say it.
Yeah.
You know, enough of this insider source business.
Yeah.
You can tell any story you want to on that basis. But, you know, he was going on and on about his sources had told him that the plane had flown close in the wake of another civilian airliner over Indian airspace and landed in Iran, okay?
Yeah.
So in other words, it was another Iran push. Well, interestingly enough, that died almost as soon as he said the words.
Oh.
No one has paid any attention to that idea. It's not going to go anywhere for ratcheting up any anti-Iran feeling in the West. You know, if that was the intent, it didn't work. Again, I think it's because nobody really knows. And I think everybody kind of senses this. There's 5 different versions, as far as I can tell, by my last count. 5 different versions of the story.
Yeah.
To this day. And, now we're still getting told that they found debris in the Indian Ocean. And you'll recall, I made the prediction, be extremely suspicious of any stories if they start talking about debris in the Indian Ocean. Why? Because the Indian Ocean is deep. If the debris sinks, only certain nations have the technology to find it.
Right.
That means it cannot be corroborated.
Yes.
And so on and so forth. Well, this is basically the line that's sort of being pushed. But again, the story's not there. There really isn't a story, and that's the problem here. They can't create international agreement on the spin that they're gonna put to this story. So I'm left with they don't know what happened to it.
I think you're right.
And I don't mean to laugh because I laugh at the silliness of the explanations. I'm not laughing at the incident itself because there's families that have lost loved ones. Don't know what's going on.
Joseph, hasn't there been some kind of UFO activity that made things disappear in the past?
Oh, sure. There have been. This is not a well-known feature of the UFO phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been all sorts of incidents. I tried to kind of give a synopsis of them in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations.
Yeah.
There have been incidents of UFOs diving at civilian airliners and causing the airliners to take emergency evasive action.
Yeah.
There have been incidents of UFOs, as I said before, turning things on and off.
Mm-hmm.
There have been incidents, even the famous 1965 blackout. Some people think that this was UFO related.
Yes.
Because there were UFOs spotted over certain power substations that were fingered as being the stations that brought about the blackout in 1965. There have even been rumors that President Johnson was apprised of this and set up some sort of study group to determine the vulnerability of the power grid to that sort of thing. I think you have to hold open all possibilities until a story comes out about this airliner that begins to make some sort of consistent sense rather than 5 different versions of what happened.
Yes.
We've got the Chinese version, we've got the Malaysian version, we've got the Indians saying, no, there was no such thing flying over our airspace. Sorry, General McInerney. The idea that the Indians don't know that their airspace is being surreptitiously violated by a civilian airliner flying at altitude close to another civilian airliner, that's nuts.
Yes, it is.
That's nuts. Because, that if that's the case, then what does it say about anybody's air traffic control? If you've got airliners in collision proximity to each other, they have warning systems that go off.
Yes.
And India rightly called the general on this whole scenario and said that's nuts.
Yeah.
We'd know about it, and they would. It's this idea that India is just a backward country with bulls with antennas on their heads.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's just, it boggles my mind sometimes how stupid they think people are. But, UFOs have done a lot of things, strange things, and what they've done over time convinces me that in spite of all those people out there that think that this is a benign phenomenon, the fact of the matter is, if you're in the military-industrial establishment or complex or whatever you wish to call it.
Yeah.
If you're in that complex and you're tasked with analyzing the UFO phenomenon, the only conclusion that you can come to is that this is a threat.
Yes.
And your response is going to be tailored accordingly. So, I don't rule anything out of the picture here. I don't rule anything out of the picture.
Poof.
Poof.
Yeah. Poof, poof. Boy.
Yeah, and again, there have been airliners that have disappeared. I mean, just totally gone missing.
Vanished.
Yeah. Poof, gone.
And it wasn't there in Berlitz, in one of his books.
Mm-hmm.
That's the author of the story that I mentioned before about this military troop that marched up this mountain into this cloud, and they disappeared and were never heard of or seen again.
There's all sorts of stories like this.
Yeah.
There are very strange stories of I believe a missing British regiment in the Ypres salient during World War I. There's a story from the Vietnam War that I recount in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations of a North Vietnamese regiment that American troops were monitoring and that was on a nearby hill. That the next day there was apparently a UFO sighting. The next day that North Vietnamese regiment was gone.
Yeah.
There have been stories from the Korean War of UFO activity against American and Chinese fighters. In one case, in the Korean War, an American unit, a battalion or company, one of the smaller sized units, saw and sighted a UFO and fired upon it and heard the bullets hitting it.
Oh my gosh.
There's been all sorts of this stuff for a long time. They get suppressed. Berlitz wrote the famous book about the Bermuda Triangle and popularized the disappearance of Flight 17 after World War II. The flight of 5 torpedo bombers that took off from Florida and were never heard from again. They maintained radio contact with the tower, and then it became clear that the leader of the wing was increasingly disoriented and unable, and reported that his instruments were going nuts, and then the flight disappears.
Yes.
And they still, to my knowledge, have not found any wreckage of those planes. There have been, I think, recovery of a couple of those types of Corsair bombers in that region, but the flight itself consisted of 5 aircraft, and I don't think they've found a bunched up group of 5 old Corsair bombers at the bottom of the Caribbean yet, at least to my knowledge. I could be wrong, but even still, if you did find it, that doesn't explain why an experienced flight commander loses total orientation and the flight crashes. So you're not really explaining things, even if you do find them. So these things have gone on for a long, long time, and because of that, I think when you look at Malaysia Flight 370, you still have to hold open the possibilities, because, like I say, the explanations that we're hearing, if this was a false flag or covert op, some country would be raising a huge stink about it. To me, it's telling that China, which suffered the most victims on that flight, it's very telling to me that the Chinese government is being very quiet. If they suspected covert operations from another country involved with that flight, particularly us, or any Western power, or Israel, or anything like that, the Chinese would be pitching a hissy fit. And by the same token, if we suspected the Chinese hijacked it, or so on, we'd be pitching a hissy fit.
Yes.
And none of this is happening. I think quietly, and I'm crawling way out onto the end of the twig of speculation here, I think quietly in the background, GeorgeAnn, the leaders of the countries concerned have probably been quietly discussing this and coming to the same conclusion. That, you know, we've got to come up with a story that we can all agree on, and they haven't yet. But I think they're probably all confronting a big mystery here.
Yeah, that's right. Oh. Well, Joseph, knowing the kind of technology that Germany had back before the big wars, what must they have now?
Who, the Germans or just people in general?
The Germans and people. Just, you know, it's got to be absolutely mind-boggling technology.
Germany is a mystery because Germany, like Russia, does not come out and publicize their secret projects like we do. You know, they don't make big noise about it. It's very interesting that a German aerospace center in Cologne was hacked and has been hacked for a few months.
Yes.
And again, I'm scratching my head, GeorgeAnn, because the stories that they're putting out is, well, it looks like it might be Chinese. Well, you know, what are the Chinese going to learn from the Germans about rockets?
Right.
Not much.
And it's not about rockets.
No, I don't think it is. I think there's something else going on. You know, the Chinese, if they're involved or not, I don't care. It's interesting that this was hacked at all. It's a little indicator that they're up to something over there, but who knows what it may be. People in general, I go back to what I've said all along. At the end of World War II, you have a UFO phenomenon that is quite apparently, just given the sheer numbers, not entirely accountable for on the basis of human hidden or secret technology.
Yeah.
There's too much of it. So somebody's producing this stuff, and it may not be from here.
Yeah.
Or if it's from here, it's from somewhere or some place or group that we don't know anything about.
Like that place maybe in the center of Australia?
Well, subterranean, who knows? Underneath the oceans, who knows? I mean, there's lots of USO activity, unidentified submerged objects. Who knows? But they were confronted with the problem. And the problem was there's an apparent threat here. It's not an imminent one, but it's nevertheless potentially hostile.
Yeah.
We've got to develop a parity response. Eventually, that's going to require a lot of money, and it's going to require a Manhattan-sized project of several decades in length. So in other words, they were confronted with a huge problem, not just technologically, but financially. How to finance this?
Yeah.
Well, you finance it by setting up a huge system of finance that's largely hidden to harvest local economies on a global basis.
You mean steal local economies on a global basis?
Well, no, I mean harvest, both overtly and covertly. Stealing is only one aspect of it. You set up a huge mechanism to do this, and I think that's what we're really looking at, and why the financial analysts can't make sense of it, because they're not looking at the whole picture.
Yeah.
You know, I'm four square with former Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts on this. She's come to the same conclusion. This is too big. It's too well organized. It's been going on for too long. So what would have led them to put such a system into place? Answer: UFOs.
Yeah.
Okay, and at the end of World War II, there's only one group with their hands on technology anything remotely close to this, and that's the Nazis. So you crawl into bed with them. And, you know, like it or not, that's what I think has happened, and I've been maintaining that since I started writing all those Nazi books.
Yeah.
You crawl into bed with them. So given the fact that this has been a financial, military, industrial, intelligence complex that's been in place in this country since the end of World War II, And given the fact that we've seen trillions, if not quadrillions, of dollars involved in this thing in the decades since the war, what could they have accomplished with all that money and manpower and research? Well, I think they probably could have accomplished quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't take much searching to see that back in the 1950s they were researching some very exotic stuff, and then all of a sudden, all public discussion of all of that research absolutely stopped.
Yes.
And it stopped, incidentally. This is something that most people don't get. They usually look to the West when they point out that this public discussion stopped. The same thing happened in the Soviet Union, because there was open discussion in Soviet literature of some of these weird kind of fringe pseudoscience ideas in physics in the Soviet literature at the time, and then bang, all of a sudden, right about the same time as it stopped in the West, it disappeared from the Soviet literature.
Wow.
And that makes me think that, maybe there was quiet tacit agreement between the West and the Soviet bloc at the time. We've got to quit talking about this openly, and we're coming to the same conclusion that you guys are coming to, and we've got to knuckle down and build this stuff real fast.
Gee. Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, Joseph, who was it that was on our bell one night and said that we can go to the moon and back for lunch?
I don't remember who that was. I remember that show. I remember what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It may have been David Adair. He talked about some of those types of technologies that he claims that he saw at Area 51. He claims he saw a very advanced sort of fusion engine. I have questions about that, but I don't doubt that something advanced exists.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard from too many people that have been involved in that, and what I've seen in the open literature convinces me that some of these ideas had to have been pursued, and some of the ideas are very promising. And these are ideas dating from the 50s, if not before.
Yeah.
So, then you've got the whole German Bell story, that fascinates me and other people. So I don't doubt that they have some sort of capability that is different from rockets, and that it is a genuine off-world capability.
Yeah.
That raises to a new height that if they have that capability, then might they have encountered some sort of contact with another species, or have been able to verify all of the strange pictures that we've seen of strange stuff on other planets.
Yeah.
Either way, if they have managed to verify the latter, then they have to be thinking, okay, there what used to be a civilization out here, so where did everybody go?
Yeah.
So, and if they've had contact with anyone, then what kind of contact was it? Was it the shooting kind, or was it, we'll give you a few beads for this bridge?
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Who knows? I think that it's very interesting to me to look at how the Western world knew for at least 2 centuries, or at least certain elites in the Western world knew for at least 2 centuries of the New World and exploited it.
Oh, yeah.
Secretly.
Yes,
okay?
secretly, you're right.
And then they had the big event. Okay, it's time to discover it now. It's time to bring everybody into the picture.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, that was so carefully orchestrated and carefully done.
Yes.
that I'm thinking all the little dots are looking the same way right now as to what we saw happen in the 15th century.
Yeah.
Everything is looking almost identical. That's what fascinates me here.
Oh, boy. Well, there definitely is something going on. I mean...
Oh, yeah. No argument for me.
Yeah. Good grief. It's like Roswell, like all of these things. There's unanswered questions.
Yeah, there are. There's huge unanswered questions, and sooner or later, they're going to be answered. And here's what I think will happen. If you look, when the new book comes out, I hope people will pay very close attention, because it's in 3 very different parts, for a purpose. But in the first part of the book, I hope people really pay attention to the dots that are being connected, because each dot has been out there. Each dot has been publicly known for a long time.
Yes.
The problem is people are taught by our educational system to avoid connecting dots.
Yeah.
And then to avoid drawing out the implications of the connections once they're made.
That's right.
So when you see the connections and you see the implications, I hope people pay close attention, because what it means is that the discovery of the New World was not a discovery, it was a revelation.
Yeah.
And that meant that it was a controlled revelation.
Yes.
It was orchestrated in a certain way to get people thinking a certain way about what had just changed in their conceptual world.
Yeah, that's right.
This is, I think, what we're seeing now.
Well, there was somebody sent me a link to a video, a YouTube thing, and this guy's saying that the Pope has said that Christianity is an illness. And I responded to her saying, it's no more of an illness than any of the Yahwist religions.
No, that's true. But whether the Pope said this or not is immaterial. What
Right.
is really going on is, if you look carefully at space-related things, in the last 3 weeks, we've had the Vatican make some announcements and sponsor a conference on extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
We had former President Clinton get on the Jimmy Kimmel show and talk about his preoccupations with aliens and trying to get to the bottom of Area 51 and talking about the movie Independence Day, that, the aliens come down here and start shooting, and it forces everybody to make nice. Okay, now, what a strange topic for Bill Clinton to be talking on late-night American television.
Yeah, totally bizarre.
Well, not totally bizarre. It's planned.
Yeah, it is.
Ex-presidents just don't sit down and shoot off their mouth.
Yeah.
And whatever else we say about him, Bill Clinton was not a stupid man and isn't a stupid man.
Yeah.
He doesn't do anything without calculation. Okay. Let's give credit where credit is due. So we had that happen. Then we have the NASA administrator, James Bolden, recently stating, well, all the people that are clamoring for us to go back to the moon and to use that to go on to Mars have to shut up, because we've got this plan and it involves, and I agree, we've got to go to Mars. It's essential for human survival.
Yeah,
now, he's come out and said this. Now, wait a minute here.
Joseph, they're trashing our planet.
Well, but no, we're doing serious damage, but I don't think, I may be sounding like I'm quibbling here, but again, I'm not on the hype and hysteria here. That, we're trashing the planet, we've got to change our ways, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we've got to change our ways, and part of changing our ways is, New energy sources. Well,
Yeah.
what does new energy sources mean? New energy sources, folks, means new financial system.
Oh, boy.
And what do we see being put into place? Okay. You see, you can't, this is why you've got to quit thinking in terms of isolated sets of dots. Dots have to be connected.
Yes.
Think interdisciplinary. And Bolden is saying this. Well, why is he saying it? Is it simply because of global warming or we're trashing the planet? You know, what's he really saying here? I don't think he's saying that at all. Given the context of Clinton coming out and saying, okay, what if aliens came down here and started shooting? We'd all make nice. Now, when people say these types of things, GeorgeAnn, you know me, I like to play my silly little war games. So the first thing that pops into my mind is, why are they really saying this? Why is this coming out of somebody connected at a high level to the military-industrial finance breakaway civilization complex?
Yeah.
Okay. Why are they really saying this? So you look at where the solar system is. Where is it? It's on a remote limb of the Milky Way galaxy, almost, you know, in galactic terms, almost at the edge of the galaxy. It's this tiny little system with a inhabitable planet that's extremely rich in heavy elements and priceless commodities, like water.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
things like this. And suppose you were, you know, let's just play fun here. Suppose you're an intergalactic empire, and you've noticed this planet. Oh, looky there, and the natives are relatively stupid and unadvanced.
Yes.
Let's go take this planet. Well, to get to this planet, you have to go through the other planets and their orbits on the outer rim of the solar system.
Yeah.
And one of them is the outermost solid planet. That's, guess what? Mars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, thinking in purely military terms here, if you're going to construct a planetary defense from an alleged potential threat, what are the two planets most of all that you need to have control of? You know, you need to have control of the high ground overlooking the low ground. Well, what are they? You know, this is basic military stuff. It's the moon.
Yeah.
And Mars.
Oh, boy.
That's just putting it very simplistically, but it's true. So beyond whether we're trashing the planet or not, if these people are even remotely concerned that they might be facing something like that, then it's an inevitability from a purely military point of view that they have to go there. Let me repeat that. If they are even thinking remotely on this type of analysis, then they have to go there.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Gee. Whoa, Joseph. Well, as we've talked about before, you know, and I've said, I believe that we're already on Mars and setting stuff up.
Well, we may be. You know, again, that's my point.
Yeah.
It's looking to me, there's 2 points here. There's the financial point that we talked about earlier. We've had now all the decades, the 6.5 decades or so from the end of World War II until now. Or pardon me, 7 decades really. From the end of World War II until now, that this financial, military, industrial, secret intelligence research complex has been in existence.
Yeah.
So, you know, we were able to build the atom bomb in 3 years.
Oh, boy.
With lots of money and lots of people. 3 years. So, could they have accomplished a great deal in 70? Yeah, you betcha.
Oh, well, that's what I was saying earlier.
Okay. Yeah.
Because there was unknown technology way, way back.
Of course.
And if they had that kind of technology, back then.
Yeah.
What must they have now?
Well, exactly.
Look at the plane that flew over the American ship there.
Bingo. That's my point. But there's another point here, and that's the historical one. That's the textual one that's going to be driving their thinking. There is clearly, given the space probes that we have seen and the strange photographs, there is clearly a strong prima facie case to be made that there was something out there in this solar system by way of civilization. So do I doubt that we may have something on Mars? No, I think it's a possibility. What it looks to me, let's go to the other data set that I just got done talking about.
Okay.
It looks to me, when you sit down and start looking at where all of this stuff is coming from, it's coming from the Vatican.
Yeah.
It's coming from a former president. It's coming from the current head of NASA. It's coming from the Chinese president who says he wants to militarize space. It's coming from Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, who says a month before the Chelyabinsk meteor incident that Russia needs to develop an asteroid defense system.
Yeah.
Okay? Look at what these people are saying and who's saying it. It looks to me not so much like they're talking nonsense. It looks to me like the same thing is happening now as was happening in Europe in the 15th century, before Columbus sailed on his so-called voyage of discovery, which was really, if you look carefully at it, a staged voyage of revelation.
Yes.
That's what it looks like to me.
Yes.
That's what it looks like. I could be, I tell people all the time, this is high-octane speculation, and I'm perfectly willing to admit I could be 100% wrong, and I'd lay actuarial odds that I probably am 90% wrong. Okay?
Oh, boy.
But
I don't think you are.
But that's honestly the way it's looking to me.
Well, it does look that way.
Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah, all of this stuff going on down here is... Can we pause for a minute?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, everybody.
I'll be right back.
We'll be back. We are back.
Okay.
Okay, Joseph. Fire away.
Well, yeah, we were talking about space and how I think that what we're looking at is a period of carefully managed social engineering in terms of preparation of some sort for some type of space revelation. Now, I say it that way because I don't want people to start thinking in terms of UFO disclosure or ET. Okay?
Right.
It could be those things. It could be something else. But I think we're being carefully prepared. All the signs are there.
Mm-hmm.
When you see what happens in the book that's coming out, what happened prior to Columbus and who was behind it, and then what you see happening with Columbus and who's behind it. All right?
Right.
When you look at that and compare it to now,
mm-hmm.
you have the same elements.
Mm-hmm.
You have religion,
yeah.
You have political leaders, and you have heads of navigation, masters of navigation,
yes.
and, the equivalent of space back then. That's the three things that are involved. And then behind that, you have hidden international finance and a hidden international military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
To boot.
Yeah.
You've got the same mix of players as what you see happening now. And with all the strange announcements about meteors and meteor defense and all of this stuff. Now, I think geopolitically, that what this means is the post 9/11 American attempt the post-Soviet, post-9/11, because both of those things have to be connected geopolitically, that in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet bloc, and then especially given new impetus after 9/11, there was an attempt to create quickly a unipolar world under American hegemony.
Yeah.
That, I think, is failing.
Good.
And I suspect that there are factions within the Western elite that know this, and as I've mentioned to you before on some other interviews, I suspect that this has led them to conclude that for the moment they have to shore up the West and shore up their base of power, which is North America, and to revitalize manufacturing in North America, which is happening.
Well, what are we manufacturing aside from bombs and crap like that?
I'm not concerned with the what. I'm just concerned with the fact that it's happening.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that's happening, and I think it's also by deliberate design to a certain degree, is the attempt to reinstitute a bipolar world with the BRICS nations.
Yes.
Okay? Why? Because if there is a perceived threat in outer space, it is much easier, failing a one-world government able to do this, failing that, then it's much easier to have two large blocks managing that than one large block and a bunch of intermediately powerful nations that are not corralled. Follow me?
Yes.
And this may be going on. And again, it's high-octane speculation. It's way out there on the end of the twig. What I'm saying is has more weight than there is evidence to support it.
Yeah.
But that's my suspicion of what I think may be going on in the big picture. Okay. Time will tell. But my suspicion, given all the talk about space matters very quietly, I mean, it's huge. People really have to understand how huge it is for the leader of a major power like China to come out and just baldly announce that they want to militarize space.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if Merkel or Putin or Obama or Prime Minister Singh in India had come out and said that. There would be an outcry.
Oh, yeah.
And instead, what we hear is deafening silence. And again, China's not alone. It's just that the Chinese president has announced what everybody's doing and wants to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
The question is why? Well, partly it's because reserve currency status depends on space. But if you're going to protect your reserve currency status from interlopers on Earth, wouldn't it be a good idea to assume that there might be interlopers out there?
Well, I think there's kind of evidence that there is.
Well, sure, of course, but that's my point. If you're going to do all of this, again, you're square back with the big problem squatting right in the middle of the post-war picture. That's the UFO. Like it or not.
Golly.
Here's the thing, GeorgeAnn, not to consider all of this, not to consider that as the central, it's like Richard Dolan says, and he's so absolutely correct. This is the central historiographic problem of the post-war era. To ignore it in terms of political assessments, to ignore it in terms of financial assessments, is committing a material omission. It's so glaring that any analysis that's done without including that in the picture is abnormally skewed. It will not be an accurate picture. So, yeah, that's a mouthful to say, and I realize it's a whopper.
Wow.
It's a huge whopper. It means that any analysis, historical, political, financial, economic, sociopolitical, cultural, that views the Earth and humanity as a self-contained, closed system is not correct.
Right. Oh my gosh, Joseph. Good grief.
Yeah, and that's a whopper. That's a huge statement to make.
Well, going back into Genesis and the so-called Nephalim that you said had to have some genetic compatibility with the females, they would have to be acceptable to females, looking, they'd have to look kind of nice.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
But the implicit statement in Genesis is that they were sexually attractive to the so-called sons of God. Well, again, we're not sexually attracted to, most of us, to gorillas or dogs or sheep or camels.
Right. Well, my thing is, these aliens that keep popping up in the news every now and then with Vatican, blah, blah, they could be working on Wall Street for all we know.
Yeah.
Or the City of London. Yeah. I mean, they could be wearing three-piece suits and driving Maseratis.
They might, yeah. Would that be a reason you'd want to monitor everybody's DNA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You betcha.
Would that be a reason you'd want to have a global system of surveillance electronically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez. Oh. Ouch. My gosh.
Who knows? Since we're wildly speculating, you have to consider that one too.
Yes. Absolutely.
Now, I tend personally to have my doubts because there are people out there in the alternative research community that have maintained that hypothesis.
Yes.
I believe even Professor David Jacobs at some point did.
Yeah.
In one of his books, on the basis of some of his examinations of people that claim to have been abducted.
Yeah.
The problem I have with this scenario is that there is no real compelling data to support it other than this curious textual tradition from ancient times.
Yeah.
That comes, it's not just the Bible, it's the Karsag tablets, the cuneiform tablets.
Yes.
It's Japanese legends about the Yamato. It's Chinese legends about the white dragon, and on and on we could go.
Yeah.
It's all over the world, these traditions. So again, my thinking is if you're in the post-war military-industrial complex, at some point in your secret UFO studies, you're going to start examining that historical record.
Yeah.
As a means of trying to determine if this is what you're dealing with.
Okay.
And let's be clear what the conclusion there would be. I am not, as you know, in the Jonquils and Daisies school of all of these ancient gods and goddesses were just wonderful people. No, they were a really bloodthirsty lot.
Yes, they were.
When you get right down to it.
Yep.
And if you're in the military-industrial complex and you're reading those documents, that's the conclusion you're going to come to.
Right.
And when you juxtapose that conclusion with UFO reports of provocative, if not hostile action, like turning our ICBMs on and off, or starting launch sequences, or diving at civilian airliners and causing them to take emergency evasive action, and so on and so on.
Right.
If you add all that up, is what's going to be their assessment? Well, their assessment's going to be the obvious one. We're dealing with a potential threat.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet they call us terrorists.
Well,
Gee.
it does rationalize, in a certain sense, and I've said this before in one of our interviews, and wrote about it in Roswell and the Reich. It does rationalize, in a very peculiar way, why the United States and the Soviet Union built such massive stockpiles of thermonuclear weapons during the Cold War.
Wow.
Enough to destroy each other and the globe thousands of times over.
Yes.
Why? Why did we need that many big city-busting hydrogen bombs?
Oh, God.
Was it solely to obliterate the other country? Or was it simply to have such a huge numerical preponderance of these things that any potential invader would think twice? And I suspect it may be the latter.
Yeah, but if
but hang on.
Okay.
I'm not the one that proposed that idea. You know who it was?
Who?
Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso.
Oh,
in the day after Roswell. He comes right out and says, this is the hidden reason why both of these countries built these huge nuclear stockpiles. And now, he's also very clear, now that we have other kinds of weapons to deal with these things, we don't need them anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
He comes out and says that too. And everybody, most people in the ufology community tend to think Corso's book is nothing but 100% junk. I don't think it is. I think it's a carefully written book of half-truths. Otherwise, the book wouldn't have sold like it did. Yeah, he makes up a lot of stuff. He goes, but the bottom line is when you start really looking at what he says, he's one of the first people in that community to point a finger very clearly, once again, at Nazi technology. In a book supposedly about UFOs and Roswell, why does he do this? Well, he's trying to tell us something. He's trying to say, I can't connect the dots for you, but here's the dots.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I tend to think that we've been living in a reality since the end of World War II where our perceptions of things have been one thing and the insider perception of things is quite another.
Oh, yeah. Well, Joseph, recently it came out that they have produced artificial blood and
synthetic genomes.
Yeah, and chromosomes. Who are they going to use these on? These aliens?
That could perhaps be a possibility. Yeah.
Good.
That could perhaps, The other thing is if you're dealing with that kind of threat, it rationalizes almost perfectly. It rationalizes almost perfectly all sorts of geoengineering schemes. It rationalizes almost perfectly why there is such a crazy rush for GMO foods. Yeah. Because you would make
things that are compatible to their genome.
Or incompatible.
Well, yeah, but it's
But wait a minute. No. Hang on here.
It's hurting us.
It's hurting us, but listen, you're not understanding again.
Okay.
If you're saying compatible, why would you want to do that? If your assessment of this situation and the data set is that this is something potentially hostile, you're not going to want to make the planet more attractive.
Oh, brother.
You're going to want to make it less.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I'm not saying that there may not be a group of people that thinks And again, it's important to understand, when I'm saying UFOs, I'm not talking about abduction scenarios, I'm not talking about contactees, or any of that. I'm talking solely about the UFO phenomenon itself, and in particular, that aspect of the phenomenon that evidences some sort of technology under intelligent control that has been used in provocative or hostile acts against human, civilian, or military installations or targets.
Well, what if the people that are in charge of these artificial foods and blood and stuff, what if they are not themselves exactly human?
Well, that's the point. When we're doing that, we're speculating.
Yes.
We're speculating.
Yes.
What I'm suggesting, you have to understand, GeorgeAnn, the difference between when I'm speculating and when I'm saying there's a hard data set that indicates that the national security establishment can only reasonably conclude that they are dealing with a potential threat, maybe not an imminent one, but a potential one. Mm-hmm. If that's their conclusion, then you can't even really begin to speculate in those other areas, because the conclusion is going to drive them to certain sort of acts, and one of the acts it will drive them to is to attempt to find out if there has been any covert penetration of the nature that you're talking about. So, we can sit and speculate on those things all night and never go anywhere.
Yeah.
I'm willing to entertain it, just like I said earlier, but the bottom line for me, and the bottom line for what I think is a reasonably sound analysis of what we're looking at in terms of human response to this, is that this national security establishment is going to bend everything in the book, technologically, to come to some sort of parity, so that if there is a real threat, whoever's on the other end of that threat will think twice before trying anything. And that means that they're going to develop biological weapon systems, they're going to develop techniques and technologies of geoengineering, of weather manipulation, of other hard military technologies, ray guns, what have you. All of that is going to be in their repertoire of response.
Oh boy!
And if they suspect covert infiltration of the nature that we've entertained as another scenario of speculation, if that's the case, then they're going to bend every technological and hard technological and soft technique method that they can to ascertain if that's the case. However, as I said before, there is no really good hard data that this is the case.
Yeah.
There is a lot of data that something weird and truly bizarre is happening with these abduction cases.
Oh, yeah.
And there's all sorts of scenarios out there trying to interpret what is happening. And again, I think part of these cases are simply human military abductions, or MILABs as they're known. I think part of them cannot be explained, just like the UFO phenomena cannot be explained solely as human hidden technology.
Yeah.
Okay? There's something else in play. But even when you look at that something else, then you're confronted with the fact that the something else looks a lot like medieval traditions of incubus and succubus, or Celtic traditions of the fairy folk, and Germanic traditions of dwarves and so on and so forth living under the earth. So are we looking at an extraterrestrial phenomenon? Are we looking at an interdimensional phenomenon? Are we looking at a spiritual phenomenon, we don't know. But rest assured that whoever is in the breakaway civilization establishment looking at these types of questions, they're going to entertain all possibilities.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're going to entertain all possibilities of response mechanisms. I'll say that one more time. They're going to entertain all sorts of possibilities for response mechanisms.
Well, if Joseph, if it wasn't Russia saying, see what we can do with that airplane that disappeared, and if it were aliens, so to speak, I don't know of a technology that we could invent that would seriously put a dent in them.
No, GeorgeAnn, I've been over this so many times. We have to quit assuming that aliens means advanced technology hundreds or thousands of years ahead of humanity.
Yeah.
I don't, and I've said this until I'm blue in the face. This is another one of those memes out there that I want people to start thinking about very critically.
Okay.
And people aren't. This is an assumption that drives me nuts.
Okay.
Why is it that there was a dramatic increase of UFO activity during and after World War II? The standard answer, and even Oppenheimer and Einstein said it, is because humanity had reached the nuclear threshold.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I've been through this process of reasoning before, and I'm going to go through it again until people get it. We had no means of delivering a nuclear bomb or thermonuclear bomb to any off-planet target after World War II.
Right.
And we would have great difficulty trying to do so even now, although we could. Why then would this achievement have been perceived, as it apparently was, by whoever's flying around in their UFOs to keep close reconnaissance on human nuclear weapons? Why was it perceived as a threat? Because that's clearly what's going on. If you perceive an enemy has a technology that is a threat to you, what do? You keep a close eye on it. You reconnoiter it.
Yep.
That's what's going on. So why, with no delivery systems, are they keeping such close tabs on us? And the answer has to be that within the nuclear bomb itself, within nuclear capability itself, there's a hidden capability that we may not yet have seen or know about. And if that's the case, then that means that capability, that hidden potential, puts us not hundreds or thousands of years behind ET, but perhaps only mere decades.
Oh my gosh.
Or perhaps even only a few years.
Oh.
And this, it's the flip side of the argument you yourself made.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then we are capable of achieving a parity much faster than people know.
Yeah.
And I've said over and over in my books, particularly the ones with the Nazis, what I think that capability is. It's because when you fire off a nuclear bomb, I believe that what happens is that this sends out a longitudinal pulse in the medium itself, which can immediately be perceived, or almost immediately be perceived, by whoever has the technology to do so light years away.
Yeah.
And that pulse, that bomb transduces energy from somewhere else depending upon the time, location, planetary positions of when you set it off. So in other words, there's a physics here that very quickly became evident to the nuclear powers because of the UFO concern over them, and that's what they started investigating, and that's what they've held hidden. So please, people, understand that this implies that we are not hundreds or thousands of years behind. We may be at parity now.
Oh my goodness.
The problem is that these technologies, in turn, would mean that engineering on a truly stupendous scale was possible, and it would also mean that the entire financial system, as we have known it over the past centuries and millennia, would be radically changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they have to manage the transition of that change.
Mm-hmm.
And if E.T. shows up shooting or otherwise, that transition has to be managed even faster.
Oh, boy.
So in other words, they're dealing immediately after World War II with a third problem, and that third problem is that they have to socially engineer the transition itself. In other words, they know that if they create technologies that achieve near parity or parity with what it is they're dealing with, that at the same time, sooner or later, those technologies will get out, and therefore they have to put the mechanisms in place to achieve a smooth transition culturally, economically, financially, and they have to make sure that those technologies don't fall into the wrong human hands.
Yeah.
This is an enormous problem.
Oh.
And please understand, I talk about all of this, the social engineering aspect of all of this, because they talked about it and published it. And it's called the Brookings Report.
Yes.
They talk about all of this in 1961.
Oh, boy.
And put it right out there for everybody to see. This is what all of this technology stuff, this is the social reality that it entails.
Wow.
And they come right out and tell you that we need to do intergenerational studies of the impact of all of this. They come right out, and I even quote the passages in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations. Now, why would they be so concerned? If they were dealing with an enemy or a potential threat that was hundreds or thousands of years in advance of us, would they even be bothering with sociological studies like that?
No.
No. That's the biggest clue right there.
Yeah.
That's the biggest clue right there in the Brookings Report, that we are not, contrary to the ufology community and the meme that is present in so many people's heads, that we are not that far behind.
Wow.
When we lit off the A-bombs, that was the signal to whoever it is out there that's been watching this whole human panoply of history. That was the signal that we're about ready to take the big step.
Well, here recently, I think it was North Korea that did a nuclear test, and Washington said, knock it off, stop it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But big deal. The problem here is any country acquiring a nuclear weapons capability, it's my belief, based on the history of nuclear and especially thermonuclear weapons and their inability to pre-calculate actual yields within margins of error that are acceptable. It's that tells me that there was an aspect to this physics they didn't know about and didn't understand, and once they saw it, they kept testing these things because they were trying to understand that physics. Once you've lit off your hydrogen bomb, you know it works, so you don't need to test anymore.
Right.
Okay, so why do they keep doing it? The only real explanation that makes any sense to me is that they keep testing them, not to show the other guy that, hey, our bombs really work, you better watch your step. It's, like the Russians need to be reminded of this, or like we needed to be reminded that, yeah, hey, we Russians know how to build H-bombs too.
Yeah.
Light one off, and okay, we get the idea.
Yeah.
But to keep doing it, and doing it, and doing it, and then thinking, oh, gee, we better quit testing these dang things in the atmosphere. Let's test them underground from now on.
Yeah.
Why? The question is why? Well, the only explanation that makes sense to me is that, yeah, they've come up with a new design for a bomb, smaller, bigger, bang. Okay, let's test that. But you don't need to keep doing this for hundreds of tests.
Right.
And the real reason that makes sense to me is, and the reason why I think China and France, the recent newcomers to the nuclear club, keep doing this, is because they're trying to learn that physics.
Yeah.
Because I think it's such a closely held secret, and the reason it's closely held is it leads to other technologies.
Oh boy, yeah, I can buy that.
If these things are responses to the local physics of space-time, that means at some point these things have a gravity effect. Mm. And once you say that, of course, then anti-gravity, field propulsion, and we need to know the effects of those things on the physical medium. And the only way we can find that out is to detonate our hydrogen bombs. So, on and on we could go. But what I'm trying to drive home here, that I hope people get, is that the response of UFOs to our acquisition of nuclear weapons would have inevitably been the signal to the military establishment, to the intelligence establishment, pardon me, that there's something here that's causing them concern and we don't know what it is. We'd better find out.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.
Joseph, when we nuked Japan, some people were saying that what that did, it shattered the people that were killed. It shattered their souls. The explosion was so tremendous.
Hang on, let's pause.
Okay.
I'll try and address that. Hang on.
Okay. We're live again.
We are definitely live. All right. You're asking me to go even further out onto the twig of speculation than I've ever been before.
Well, I don't know anybody else to talk to about that.
I understand. And I just am prefacing this so that people understand that there's not a shred of really good evidence or thinking on this question that I'm aware of. Mm-hmm. There's no quote-unquote peer-reviewed scientific paper or anything like this out there on this question.
And who cares about peer review?
Well, I personally don't, but I'm just saying this because I'm tired of hearing that I need to submit myself to some sort of committee of conformity.
Oh, brother.
I
That's
just don't.
Nuts, Joseph.
Well, of course it's nuts. So, once again, I'm just a hack from South Dakota. My credentials are not in science. This is high-octane speculation. I don't know how else to put it more clearly than I have done. If there is a direct link between the physical medium and consciousness or mind.
Yes.
And if you have a technology that can, at a local level, severely stress the physical medium, like a nuclear bomb, which, on the assumptions of what I've been saying before about nuclear yields and how they slightly vary over time, which, when you say time, that simply means local geometrical position and description of local space. In other words, where are the planets? What phase is the moon in? what's solar activity and all of this stuff, okay? Where are you detonating the bomb on the surface of the Earth, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
All of these factors, that's all the geometry of time, okay? If, therefore, a nuclear bomb is responsive in that way to the geometry of local space-time, and if, as a consequence, it sends out a longitudinal pulse in the physical medium, it could conceivably be that one of the technologies of perceiving the pulse may be a consciousness or psychic technology that we don't know of, or at least publicly. And it could conceivably be that it could somehow shatter or stress souls.
Yes.
Now, I do not think it is possible, for reasons I won't go into, to destroy by that means souls.
Yes.
But it is possible to severely stress them. So could there be that kind of connection? I don't know. I do find it curious that in so many of these types of topics, George Lucas's films, the Star Wars epics, seem to address each of them in a detailed way. And here is what I'm thinking of. In the very first film, Star Wars, when the Death Star blows up the planet. Everybody remembers that scene.
Yes.
When the Death Star blows up the planet Alderaan in the first film, Obi-Wan Kenobi, hundreds of millions of miles away, presumably, from that system, suddenly staggers. You'll see him stagger. He's played by Sir Alec Guinness. He staggers in the scene and sits down, and people ask him what's wrong. He says, I feel a sudden disturbance in the Force. As if millions of voices suddenly cried out and were no longer there.
Yes.
Okay? I think, again, that Lucas, given the fact that he had some pretty highbrow
intelligence
advisors or consultants, Joseph Campbell among them, and of course Campbell would have informed him of the Egyptian teachings of Ma'at, which is the Egyptian word, in my opinion, for the physical medium. It's more than that, but in this context it'll do. But I think, again, the fact that George Lucas has that little scene, and the fact that his Death Star is a big, huge, artificially built moon that, hey, just happens to look like Saturn's moon, Iapetus, but hey, who's talking? And incidentally, there's been a paper come out allegedly trying to explain how that ridge got around the equator of Iapetus, and I have a blog coming up about it. It's really a hoot. I mean, scientists are desperate when they're starting to sound like Chicken Little, but anyway.
Oh, Joseph.
But anyway, no, do I think it's possible? Yeah, I do. But again, not a shred of evidence. There, at least on that kind of topic, there are experiments that have been done about the influence of conscious intention on the formation of materials. That are out there, and there's some sort of connection that seems to be being demonstrated, but this is in a whole different ballpark and at a whole different scale. So I stress once again that what I just said, it's not peer reviewed. It's the statement of a hack from South Dakota whose academic credentials are not in any sort of the sciences, on and on. I'm putting all my caveats out there just so I'm not being accused of some sort of dishonesty or anything like that.
Well, I appreciate that, Joseph. And, it really took me back when I read that this blast that we did that it so disturbed the dying people's souls because it was so horrific and powerful that it shattered their souls.
Well, again, I don't doubt it. It raises all sorts of questions about consciousness because literally, if you were under that blast, your body would have been vaporized faster than your mind would have been able to perceive what was happening.
Yes.
So in other words, your consciousness is literally lingering longer than your body.
Yeah.
So again, the whole thing raises all sorts of troublesome issues, philosophically, scientifically, any which way you slice it.
Oh.
But you're exposed to a lot of thermal neutrons and literally being vaporized. I can't. No one knows.
Do you know
problem.
The Marshall Islands is bringing a lawsuit against the U.S. and the U.K. for all the nuclear tests that went on out there?
I don't doubt it.
And
I don't doubt
God bless those people. I hope that they get an honest court.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. God.
Good luck with that.
Oh.
Castle Bravo, the famous test that ran away from us. The problem of getting an honest court there, GeorgeAnn, is precisely to go into those tests, and that was the test that exposed native peoples to much more radiation than had been calculated prior to detonating the bomb.
Yeah.
So in other words, for that lawsuit to succeed, they're going to have to get into the Castle Bravo test.
Yes. And
my point in saying good luck with the honest court is that means that they're going to have to start raising some of these issues in open court, and my bet is that they are going to discover that aspects of that test are still classified, and if that's the case, my bet is that those aspects are classified because the physics is classified.
Yeah.
So, I hate to say it that way, but, good luck in getting any sort of honesty here.
Well, good luck in getting honesty in any court.
Well,
nowadays.
That too.
Joseph, it just seems to me like all the elected officials, all the people in power are in somebody's hip pocket.
Well, of course. Princeton University just came out with an academic study.
Oh, good.
That says, the U.S. appears to be not a republic but an oligarchy.
Yes.
And, okay, really? Gee.
That took a real brain power.
Exactly. It's one thing if us schmucks out here say it, but by golly, we better sit up and pay notice if Princeton says it. Well, gee, come on. Of course it is. The plain fact of the matter is, I think that you have to go all the way back and understand that it was that way from the beginning of this constitutional arrangement.
Yes. And
that's the problem here. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we ought to ditch the Constitution. No, quite the converse. It would be nice if we started paying attention to it. But
exactly.
But that said, even still, James Madison, in I forget which Federalist paper it was, number 10, I think, is going on and on about the need for a strong central government, and, it'll be much easier to prevent the growth of a corrupt power with a strong central government because all the factions will be fighting each other. And, of course...
That is some reasoning.
Yeah, exactly. This is talk about convoluted nonsense. Sorry, exactly. President Madison. Dolly may have been spiking your cakes, but and the Anti-Federalists pointed out at the time that give us an example of this arrangement in history, where this has been the result, and of course there wasn't any. So in other words, it was pure propaganda. This is the other thing I keep telling people. this is a cultural thing that we're in, and we have to be willing to examine all aspects of our culture, including some of our most cherished beliefs, and that's what they are, beliefs.
Yes.
But are they, in fact, real?
Yeah.
And that means, if necessary, we go back and reread the Federalist Papers, and by golly, let's at the same time read the Anti-Federalist Papers, folks.
Yeah.
Find out what's going on. We need to remember something. Those founding fathers at the Philadelphia Convention were called there to tinker with the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah.
Not to give us an entirely new Constitution.
Right.
Which is what they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in my book, folks, I don't know about your book, but in my book, that qualifies as a conspiracy, okay?
Yes, it does.
So,
yes, it does.
Yes, it does. So, how many Americans know that the first president of this country was not George Washington? It was John Hanson.
Yeah.
Okay? Nobody knows that because we had a president under the Articles of Confederation, but nobody remembers it.
Yeah.
So, this country was in existence before the current constitutional arrangement. What's scary to me, much more scary than the rampant corruption, is now we are hearing calls for a new constitutional convention.
Yeah.
And if you thought the last one was a conspiracy, I've got news for you.
Oh boy. Yeah. Who can you trust with that?
Yeah, do you really want to see these people coming up with a new one? Mm-hmm. We have little to no voice now.
Yeah. Well, my understanding, Joseph, all EOs are not lawful. There's a difference between what's legal and what's lawful. And we've got a de facto legal government that is acting unlawful.
Oh, there's all sorts of analyses out there.
Yeah.
I'm not a politician or a political scientist. That stuff really doesn't interest me. What interests me here is, in this context, we're now starting to hear calls for constitutional revision.
Yeah, well, we've got 34 states that have signed on for it.
Well, I've heard that story. I don't know how true it is, but
it's scary.
Whatever they would come up with, I think would be so self-evidently in their own self-interest that it probably wouldn't fly for very long. So,
absolutely.
It's a crazy world. I think if they were to try and come up with a constitution, it'd end up looking like the European Union. Which isn't a big success story.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably exactly right. Even little Ecuador is kicking out a whole huge group of U.S. military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that story, and there's going to be more.
Yeah.
I think that's just the beginning. I think when you overplay your geopolitical cards, when this is the oldest geopolitical game on the block again, and people have to start understanding this.
Yeah.
When you're the British Empire, everybody wants to take you down.
Yeah.
And when you're the British Empire, you think you can handle those upstart Germans all by yourself. That didn't work out too well.
No, it didn't.
And that's what I see going on here. When you're the biggest person on the block with the biggest stick, and you start using that stick too much to push the little guys around, pretty soon, sooner or later, you run out of goodwill.
Oh, yeah.
And
look what we just tried to do to Puerto Rico and to Cuba.
Well, I don't know what we just tried to. I don't. You know me. I don't sit here watching the news.
With the Twitter thing, just.
I don't even know.
Trying to get a action going with the people to revolt.
Oh well, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I
mean, how many places is this country sticking their fingers in a hateful way?
Again, covert actions can only go so far, and the other problem is you use that too many times. Like I keep saying, it's a game two people can play.
Yep, it certainly is.
It's a game that two people can play.
Yes, absolutely, Joseph. It just irritates me that, what we're doing to the world. It just irritates me.
Well, me too. It irritates me because of the backlash against this country and against its people.
Yes.
That's what irritates me.
Well,
because the people of this country are not bad people.
Right.
And that goes for a lot of the people in the government. I don't think of the government as this monolithically bad thing. It's just that there seems to be so much craziness in certain branches of the government, and even there, again, you're not dealing with monolithic things. So, I just hope to see some more sanity. I think, and I'll say this again, I think President Obama, and you know me, I have no love lost for that particular political party or any of its policies.
Yeah, me too.
But I have to look at what has been happening. And I'm not entirely convinced that he is driving all of this. In fact, I think he may be one of the forces trying to rein it in some respects. This whole Ukrainian mess, and really the kind of the slap on the wrist that he eventually gave the Russians, I think there were people pushing for a lot more.
Oh yeah, they wanted.
And I think he's stood them down, much to his own political cost. But I think there's some real factional infighting and struggle going on, and he may be holding the reins back rather than letting them go. So who knows? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, one thing for sure, it's just so convoluted, so horrifically. I can't even think of the word.
Well, it's like I've said many times. We are in one of those periodic 500-year cycles of transition, but this particular one is the biggest one in human history ever, and that's why it's so confusing. Even the experts really don't have, in the final analysis, a real handle on the complexity of what's going on.
Well, Joseph, my gosh, I mean, they've got laws on the books now that if you're not with us, you're against us. You're a terrorist.
I know.
They've got, they can lock you up. No communication with your family, ever. No attorney, anything. I mean, it's just insane.
And again, insanity. And insanity doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So,
Are you familiar with what is called the Definitive Treaty of Paris, 1783?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Oh, boy. If you look at that treaty, you're talking about the one that was signed between the United States and Great Britain to conclude the revolution.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, I think you sent it to me the other day, and I read portions of it again the first time in many years.
Yeah.
If you look carefully at that treaty, you can see looming in it the financial arrangements between the United States and Great Britain that are eventually going to lead to the War of 1812. You can see it in the fishing rights that are being claimed by both sides, the arrangements along the border areas and the seas and so on and so forth. And you can also see in the treaty a stipulation that outstanding debts and so on and so forth would be resolved in good sterling. And what that means is that, and this treaty is the prelude to the Philadelphia Convention.
Yes.
Because what that means is that the colonies, which are now independent states. And it's interesting, the treaty recognizes each state by name as an individual sovereign entity, and then recognizes the United States, okay?
Yeah.
So you're really looking at a curiosity here in terms of international law, because it's recognizing, when you look at it in a certain way, it's recognizing 14 entities, not 13.
Yeah.
And by the statement that everything, outstanding debts and so on, are to be resolved in good sterling, this means that those entities in the United States, which are bullion poor, cannot resolve the debt.
Right.
And this is setting up, of course, Alexander Hamilton and the Constitutional Convention. I'm reading an interesting series of books right now called Pieces of Eight about the monetary clauses in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Ultimately, this means that, this means that the United States has to monetize its debt. So in other words, right at the beginning of the history of the country as a sovereign entity, you have the establishment of two different systems of finance. In the Constitution, bullion and debt-free money is recognized, but in terms of the actual financial arrangements that Hamilton puts into place, you have monetized debt.
Yeah.
And this, of course, sets up the financial oligarchy that begins to grow in New York and Boston, but particularly in New York, and that leads, of course, to the chartering of the Bank of the United States and that whole wrangle that went on between Nicholas Biddle and President Andrew Jackson. You know, Andrew Jackson's famous statement, "You are a den of vipers, and I'm going to root you out."
Yes.
Which, of course, he eventually does. He stops the renewal of the charter of the Bank of the United States, and then the banks respond by flooding the country with lots of privately issued banknotes, creating a currency crisis.
Yeah.
So, you know, this whole financial game has been going on. In other words, it's set up in that treaty, and it's been going on ever since.
Well, why do they, you're right, why do they start out in the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity? Why did they do that? Because that's standard protocol at the time. You know, these are Christian nations, and that's the way of giving the probity, the divine sanction to the agreement that's being read. Most treaties at that time read very similarly. It's really if you go back to the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, at the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, you know, the principle of cuius regio eius religio, who's the region, his the religion, becomes the principle by which Europe resolves the religious conflicts. So in other words, if it's a Protestant prince, the area remains Protestant. If it's a Catholic prince, it remains Catholic. All of this goes back to all of these conventions that emerge in international law, so that's not unusual. That's nothing all that significant. Okay. Okie dokie. Well, what do you make of this new pope?
Gee. Oh, we could be here all night.
We might.
Jeez.
I'll run out of disk space.
Jeez. Well, we've been going at it over 2 hours now. I have to admit, this pope is an enigma to me. I'm having great difficulty trying to determine if he's a caretaker pope or if he's a pope. In other words, you know, I'm the guy wearing the tiara and it's my way or the highway, because he can talk in both. He can talk sounding like both. I'll tell you, I think I think that the Vatican is going through the same sort of factional infighting that other Western elites and oligarchies are going through.
I agree with that.
I think there are at least 2, possibly 3 major factions contending within the Vatican. most of what Francis is doing, I think, raises questions. Relate to how he is handling the Vatican Bank. Because, as I pointed out with a couple of interviews with Catherine Austin Fitz and in a couple of blogs on my website, Francis has required the Vatican Bank, the Institute for Religious Works, to hire an international accounting auditing firm to make the Vatican Bank internationally compliant. Now, that raises questions right there, because what that means is he is trying to position the Vatican Bank within the system of international clearing within the West. Okay, in other words, he's trying to make it much more integral to it. And the firm that he hired, I forget the exact name, but it's the same firm that's the corporate auditor for Lloyd's of London.
Oh, boy.
And for the Bank of International Settlements.
Oh, my God.
So, talk about integration here. That's forget about banking. The insurance industry, the insurance business is even more powerful in terms of its
portfolios.
In terms of its financial skullduggery. Forget about J.P. Morgan and the Federal Reserve. I mean, So that raises all sorts of questions to my mind as to what his game is. Then he turned around and appointed Cardinal Pell from Australia to be the overseer of this Vatican Bank reform. Well, immediately when he did that, I started hearing from all of my website subscribers that live in Australia.
I did too, Joseph.
This cardinal apparently has a real murky reputation in Australia for pressing the pedophile scandals and everything else. So it raises questions. Was Francis caving into pressures there, or was Pell his man? Where it's very, very hard to read, because Francis is coming into the Vatican. He's not a curial cardinal. This is why he's so hard to read. Ratzinger, his predecessor, was very easy to read because he was a curial cardinal. He had been for quite some time. Francis is a different matter, a different ball of wax. I still think that in terms of Vatican thinking internationally, that they have reached the conclusion that Europe is lost to the Vatican. You'll recall that Ratzinger, when he was still Pope, was trying to promote a re-evangelization of Europe. You're not hearing this talk from Francis.
Right.
But by the same token, the Vatican realizes they have to keep a European culture and orientation. This is too much part of their 2,000-year history. They know that the center of power for them has moved to the third world, but they cannot overtly move that direction. So what do? They elect a cardinal from a relatively prosperous second world country like Argentina with a very European culture. I still think it's very interesting and suspicious that he is a Jesuit. Because of all of the liberal theological tendencies within that order. And it also raises questions, too, historically, because the Jesuits within the Roman Church have traditionally been not only bastions of support for the papacy, and people misread that as thinking bastions of traditionalism, but it is in fact the Jesuits who have been since their inception home of a lot of Hermetic type of influences, and the most famous example of which would be the Renaissance Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, who was, every bit as much of a Hermeticist as Giordano Bruno or any of these people. So it raises some very, very big questions. I don't have a read on this guy other than that he's in one sense, he's a transition pope to transition the power center in the Vatican away from European hands. That's clear. But I don't think they're going to transition it to North America. I think they're going to keep it in Latin America or perhaps move eventually to Africa.
Well, how long do you think the Vatican will last?
Oh boy.
And I know this is speculation, so everybody.
Yeah, it is. I've had private thoughts for many years.
Yeah.
About this whole question.
Okay.
One of the trains of thought, I don't want to go into details, but one of the trains of thought is that the Vatican is the only religious institution.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not one buys or accepts its claims, which I absolutely do not, and never did. But the claims are there, and they have been there for a long time. And it therefore is the only religious institution on planet Earth that has an actual formal claim to be the sole central authority for God, so to speak.
Yeah.
You don't find any similar type of institution within Islam. You certainly don't within Judaism.
Right.
You certainly don't in most Buddhist thinking, other than, of course, the Dalai Lama, or the Panchen Lama, but many Buddhists don't accept those authorities. You don't have it in Hinduism, and on we could go.
Yeah.
So its claims and its status in this respect are unique, and in addition to this, those claims and status are to a certain extent recognized in international law. In other words, the Holy See in international law is a recognized formal entity.
Okay.
So one scenario is that if you are trying to put into place, for whatever reason, a global political order, you have to have, throughout human history, a corresponding global religious order. You have to have an authority that speaks with that voice.
Oh, boy.
And there's only one that does.
Yeah.
So I've maintained all along that either the Vatican will fall prey to this simply because of the nature of its claims, or it will actively seek to drive it.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, the other scenario is that there could be, and I think there are indications throughout history, that high in the elite that run the Western world, and for a fairly long period of time, there has been a recognition that the Yahwist religions are part of the problem, that their founding myths are erroneous, that they're not true.
Yeah.
And in that case, I suspect that the people that hold that belief are informed by either a predominantly Hermetic outlook or religion, if they have a religion at all.
Yeah.
Which means ultimately that their belief system is Egyptian.
Yeah.
Okay. Or that their belief system, if they have one at all, is profoundly occult.
Yes.
And that in either case, the ultimate game plan is somehow to transition the world out of the Yahwist religions, or to maintain them as fronts for something that in secret is Hermeticism. And I think that scenario has been going on for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
But whether or not they actually make it public is another question. That's my guess, and I don't want to go into any more details than that. I've thought about that question for a very long time and have lots of detailed notes, but I don't want to, because if I were really to share what I'm really thinking about all that, people would think I'm both nuts and be disturbed.
No, boy. Oh, Joseph, you are so precious to so many people, honestly.
No, I don't know about that.
You really are. And I thank you immensely for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. I hope it was a fun discussion.
Yeah, I think it is. And everybody, Joseph...
Help GeorgeAnn out.
Oh, gosh.
Exercise her PayPal.
Yeah, that. Thank you, Joseph. And Joseph Farrell has one on his website. Please make use of it. We've got to keep him in research material and pizzas.
Oh, jeez. Actually, turkey sandwiches have been more my staple. I'm on a budget crunch, so I'm.
Me too.
Having turkey sandwiches.
It's been grilled cheese sandwiches.
Yeah, well, those are coming.
Yeah.
I run out of turkey. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate that, and I want to thank everybody that has made donations and prayers and offer articles. The articles.
Yes.
You know, that's really a big help to me as well. So
yeah.
I want to make sure and thank everybody.
And I want to say a special thank you to the listeners in Norway. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll say God bless everybody that's paying attention. Good night.
Good night. Okay, hon.